Imagine a trout hooked beneath cold water. Its mouth opens, its body twists, its eyes stay wide. We tell ourselves it feels nothing. But what they actually think you are, Wang. For centuries, people believed fish were silent machines. Beautiful, yes, but empty inside. No mind, no memory, no suffering worth naming. And yet, every year, new science chips away at that comfortable story. The real question is not whether fish wriggle when hurt. The real question is whether something it is like to be them. Not whether they react, not whether they thrash, not whether their bodies obey the wound, but whether somewhere behind those glassy eyes, a tiny flicker of experience says, "This hurts, and I want it to stop." That is a much harder question than it sounds. Because pain is not just damage. Pain is the feeling of damage. A robot can detect heat. A thermostat can react to cold. Neither of them suffers. So when we ask if fish feel pain like we do, we are really asking something deeper, something almost philosophical about where the inner light of experience begins. And for a long time, the answer was simple. Fish were on the wrong side of the line. They had no neocortex, the wrinkled outer layer of the human brain we associate with conscious feeling. So, scientists assumed pain in fish was impossible. Full stop. Then, in the early 2000s, a quiet experiment in Scotland shook that assumption hard. A biologist named Victoria Braithwaite, working with colleagues at the Roslin Institute and the University of Edinburgh, decided to actually test it. She injected small amounts of bee venom and acid into the lips of rainbow trout. Then she watched. The fish did not just twitch and forget, they rocked back and forth on the bottom of the tank. They rubbed their lips against the gravel and the walls. Their breathing rate nearly doubled. They lost interest in food, sometimes for hours, and when given a painkiller, morphine, the strange behavior faded and normal life returned. That last detail is the part that stops you cold, because painkillers do not soothe reflexes. Painkillers soothe feelings. If morphine calmed the fish, then something in the fish was being calmed, something that, at least for a moment, looked uncomfortably familiar. Skeptics pushed back, and fairly. They argued that complex behavior is not the same as conscious suffering. A fish could appear distressed without truly experiencing distress, the way a sleepwalker can navigate a hallway with no one home behind the eyes. But then more studies arrived from labs in Norway, Australia, the United States, and beyond, and the picture grew harder to dismiss. Researchers found that fish possess nociceptors, the specialized nerve endings that detect harmful stimuli. They are wired in patterns remarkably similar to those of mammals and birds. The signals travel up the spinal cord into the brain, and in the fish brain, regions light up that handle attention, learning, and emotional processing. Not a neocortex, no, but something that may do a similar job in a different shape. Evolution, it turns out, is a tinkerer. It builds the same tool twice, in two different workshops, using two different blueprints. Birds do not have a neocortex either, and yet crows solve puzzles that stump toddlers. Octopuses are practically aliens, and yet they recognize individual humans and play with toys. So maybe the cortex was never the gatekeeper of feeling. Maybe feeling is older, deeper, and stranger than we let ourselves believe. Consider the zebrafish, a tiny striped creature beloved by laboratories worldwide. Given the choice between a barren tank and one with hiding spots, healthy zebrafish prefer the enriched one. But when researchers injected them with a mildly painful substance, the fish switched their preference. They moved into a plain chamber that contained a dissolved painkiller, even though that chamber was less of healing in every other way. They traded comfort for relief. That is not a reflex, that is a decision. Trade-offs are the fingerprints of a mind weighing one feeling against another. A reflex has no negotiating table. A feeling does. And the negotiations are showing up across species, again and again. Let me ask you something before we go deeper. When you picture a fish, do you picture a face or do you picture a meal? Be honest. Most of us were raised to see fish as scenery, as silver flickers behind glass, as something between a plant and a pet. If this video is making you rethink that, I would love to hear it. Tell me in the comments what changed your mind or what still keeps you skeptical. Your stories shake these videos more than you know. Now let us keep going, because the next layer might be the strangest of all. Memory. Fish remember. For decades we mocked them with the joke about a 3-second memory. The joke is wrong. Goldfish trained to push a lever for food at a specific hour will return to that lever at that hour even months later. Wild salmon navigate thousands of miles back to the exact stream where they hatched, guided by a scent map carved into their brains years before. Cleaner wrasse, tiny reef fish, recognize individual client fish they have met before and remember which ones tipped them with a meal and which ones tried to cheat. A creature with no memory cannot hold a grudge or a friendship. These fish hold both. And memory matters here because pain without memory is just a flash. Pain with memory becomes fear. In one experiment, fish that had been hooked once and released avoided that same lure for months afterward. Not what they think you are. To a dog, are you staff? To a bird, are you family? Remembered. They learned. They updated. They protected themselves with a knowledge that says, this object hurt me, and I do not want to meet it again. That is the architecture of suffering, a nervous system that not only feels, but remembers feeling, and changes its future to avoid it. The implications stretch in every direction. Aquaculture, the global industry that produces most of the fish we eat, raises billions of animals every year in conditions we rarely see. Sport fishing pulls millions of fish into the air for a photograph and a release we assume is harmless. Aquariums, science labs, the pet trade, even the simple ice on a market counter, all sit on top of an old assumption we are slowly losing the right to make. If fish feel something, then what we do with them matters in ways we have not fully reckoned with. This is not a guilt trip. It is a humility check. Many scientists are careful here, and they should be. They point out that fish pain is almost certainly different from human pain. A fish has no language to narrate its suffering, no autobiography to weave it into, no anticipation of next Tuesday to dread. Its pain may be simpler, shorter, less colored by the long shadows of self-awareness. But simpler is not the same as nothing. A child who cannot yet speak still hurts when they fall. A dog who cannot describe loss still grieves. Why should a creature with 300 million years of evolution behind its eyes be the one exception in the animal kingdom? The honest answer, the one most researchers now lean toward, is this. Fish almost certainly feel something we would recognize as pain, in a form shaped by their world, not ours. It is not identical to our experience. Their pain does not come with words, regrets, or hospitals. But it is real enough to change behavior, real enough to be soothed by medicine, real enough to be remembered, real enough to be avoided. And in the language of biology, that is the working definition of feeling itself. Which leaves us with a quieter, harder question, the kind that does not have a clean answer. Once you accept that a fish can feel, the old categories start to wobble. The clean line between us and them, between thinking creatures and unthinking food, becomes less of a wall and more of a mist. We are animals too. Our nerves descend from theirs. Our oldest ancestors were jawless fish drifting through ancient seas, and somewhere in that long wet lineage the first flicker of feeling was lit. Baby pain is not a human invention we project onto simpler creatures. Baby pain is an ancient inheritance older than legs, older than lungs, older than the first creature to crawl onto land, and we are just one of many species who carry the gift and the burden of being able to feel. The trout in the cold water is not a machine. It is a distant cousin. And whether we choose to fish it, farm it, study it, or simply watch it slip back beneath the surface, that small fact deserves to sit with us. Quietly. Honestly. Without panic, but without dismissal either. If this changed how you think about the creatures under the water, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps these stories reach more curious minds. Subscribe if you want more journeys into how animals think, feel, and see the world we share. And tell me in the comments, has a fish ever surprised you? A memory, a personality, a moment of strange intelligence behind the glass? I read every reply, and the best ones often become future videos. Next time, we're diving into something even stranger, the hidden inner lives of octopuses, and the question of whether they might be the closest thing on Earth to an alien mind. Stay curious, keep questioning that easy answers, and I will see you there beneath the surface.